John Lesson 58, chapter 13, verse 1. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus lived his life in anticipation of this very hour. Up to this point, Jesus enjoyed a unique protection because his hour had not yet come, and so no one was able to harm him. Now Jesus knew that his hour had come. He spoke of this awareness in John chapter 12, and even said that for this purpose I came to this hour. So he knew what was coming. He was prepared for it. It said that Jesus had loved his own, but he hadn't finished loving them. He would love them to the very end. The idea behind the phrase to the end is it actually means to the fullest extent or to the uttermost. That was his love. Verses 2 through 5. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Judas was led by the devil. Before this chapter is finished, John will show us the extent of Judas' depravity. In Luke 22:3, it describes how Satan entered Judas shortly before this. The other Gospels all work together, and each shows different facts that the other doesn't show. Several years before in his ministry, Jesus said, the Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. That was in John chapter 3. This means that at this particular time and in this particular circumstance, it was important that Jesus knew that the Father had given all things into his hands. Jesus didn't only know his authority, he also knew his relationship with God. He knew his identity as one who had come from God and as one who was going back to God. Knowing this past with God and the Father and his future with God the Father, what else could he do but glorify him in this present circumstance? At this moment of deep meaning, Jesus did something that must have seemed almost crazy. He began to do the job of the lowest servant in the house. He began to wash the disciples' feet. At this critical moment, at this evening before the torture of the cross, Jesus didn't think of himself. He thinks about his disciples. Truly, this is loving them to the very end, as he had said. As Jesus went around the table washing and drying the feet of his disciples, it was a dramatic scene. Luke chapter 22 says that the disciples entered the room debating as to who was the greatest. At this late point, they still hadn't gotten the message of what their purpose was, who Jesus was, They were still in the dark. We'll stop right there for this lesson.